She had been screaming inside for a long time, but no one ever listened. The millionaire, who had always watched in silence, approached for the first time. And in that instant, he discovered a secret that would turn his obsession into ruin. If you like love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment saying where you're listening from. The sun was already setting on the horizon when Aurora caught the bus on the outskirts of London. Her tired body sank into the seat as the vehicle snaked through the streets, cutting across the immense city, transforming from peripheral to central as the landscapes changed. The buildings grew taller, the streets wider, the people better dressed. It was like crossing parallel universes in a single journey. Aurora watched without truly seeing, her gaze lost in the dirty windows, her thoughts as distant as possible from what was to come, another night shift. When she got off at the stop, 2 blocks before the Cassian Tower, her feet already ached inside her worn-out sneakers. Not from the day's work, that was yet to begin, but from the accumulation, from the wear and tear of a lifetime of feet that had never been able to rest. Aurora walked with her body hunched, as if trying to occupy as little space as possible in the world. Her neatly folded grey uniform tucked inside her worn backpack. She would only put it on upon arrival, in the small windowless changing room in the basement. It was a strict building policy. Employees could not arrive or leave in uniform. A matter of image, the supervisors would say. But everyone knew it was so that the residents could pretend that the people who cleaned their messes didn't exist beyond those walls. The Cassian Tower rose like a monument to inequality in the heart of the London metropolis. 33 floors of concrete, mirrored glass and impenetrable security, housing the city's extremely privileged, executives, politicians, heirs, people whose names appeared in economic headlines or occasional scandals, automatic doors, facial recognition elevators, imported marble floors that could never appear to have been walked on. Aurora passed through the service entrance after 2 security checks, where stern-faced guards watched her every move as if she were potentially dangerous. 6 months working there, and they still treated her like a stranger, an intruder. Perhaps she was. She would never get used to that social chasm, so evident, so blatant in the details. The gourmet coffee served in the main lobby versus the weak, reheated coffee in the staff pantry. The Italian designer sofas for visitors versus the broken plastic benches for those who kept everything clean. "You're late?" "Aurora," said Marlene, the cleaning supervisor, a middle-aged woman with a permanently exhausted expression and a badge always hanging from her neck, like a bureaucratic collar. "There's an event today in the 14th floor ballroom, one of those charity galas. The kitchen staff has already messed everything up and it's fallen to us as always." Aurora simply nodded, wasting no words. She wasn't one to talk much, or almost at all. She headed to the tiny changing room, where 3 other women were getting dressed in resigned silence. She swapped her faded jeans and loose t-shirt for the shapeless grey uniform, pulling her black hair into a tight bun. She looked at herself for a second in the cracked mirror. 23 years of life and eyes that seemed to have seen centuries, skin too pale for someone who so rarely saw the sun, thick eyebrows framing dull, lifeless green eyes. She wasn't ugly, perhaps even beautiful. In another context, with a different gaze, with a smile she rarely allowed to exist. Her movements were mechanical, automatic, the result of a routine established with the precision of someone who learned early on that survival demands efficiency. Broom squeegee rags chemicals that made her eyes burn and her skin dry out until it cracked on colder days. She knew every corner of that building better than the residents themselves. She knew which corridors were always empty, which doors creaked, which lights flickered intermittently in the empty early hours. The Cassian Tower had its secrets, its dark corners, its peculiar silences. And Aurora knew almost all of them. She started on the 14th floor ballroom as ordered. White tablecloths were still being spread, crystal glasses stacked, exuberant floral arrangements creating a scene of planned opulence. She wiped non-existent dust, collected discarded wrappers, scrubbed stains from hurried hands. She worked with her eyes downcast, avoiding eye contact with the event organizers, who spoke loudly about donations that cost the equivalent of years of her salary. Charity made with French champagne, designer dresses, and speeches about the importance of the third sector. Aurora knew that kind of charity, the kind that needed spotlights, the kind that made sure everyone knew who was donating. Between floors and corridors, She moved like a functional ghost. Sometimes she went for hours without anyone truly seeing her or noticing her presence. She was at once invisible and indispensable, the one who removed all evidence of the imperfect humanity of the rich, dirty glasses, used tissues, inexplicable stains. They could pretend that the dirt simply disappeared, that cleanliness was a magical property of that privileged environment. Upon reaching the 22nd floor, Aurora felt it. That sensation she knew well, the feeling of being watched. It wasn't paranoia. Working in places like that, a young woman learns to recognize gazes. The gazes of poorly disguised sexual interest from bored executives, the gazes of disdain from bored wives, the gazes of calculated indifference from children raised not to see servants as complete people. But this gaze was different. This gaze came from the shadows, from the corners, from the blind spots of the security cameras. It came from someone who didn't want to be seen looking. And Aurora had felt it with increasing frequency in recent weeks. "It's the ghost of 27, Rose, one of the oldest cleaners, had said when Aurora mentioned the feeling once, in a rare moment of openness. "The man on the penthouse. No one ever sees him, but he sees everyone. The cameras are his eyes." Aurora never believed in ghosts or superstitions, but there was something about the penthouse resident, the 27th floor technically, as the building had no 13th floor due to superstition and followed a peculiar numbering, that provoked whispered conversations. Dante Salvatore, a name rarely spoken aloud, as if merely saying it could summon him. It was said he was young for his immense fortune, heir to a pharmaceutical empire or perhaps a tech empire. The stories varied. It was said he lived reclusively after a scandal, or a tragedy, or both. So many things were said, all in whispers, all in "I heard." What Aurora knew for sure was that the 27th floor was cleaned only once a week, always on Wednesdays between 2 and 4 in the afternoon, when Salvatore supposedly went out for his only weekly appearance in the outside world. A single cleaner was assigned, always under an additional confidentiality agreement, with strict rules. Nothing should be moved, touched beyond what was necessary, or commented on afterward. Aurora had never been assigned this task. Marlene said it required special experience and discretion, but the curiosity undeniably existed. When she finished the ballroom, Aurora moved on to the corridors of the 23rd floor. Her steps echoed lightly on the marble floor, the cleaning cart creaking in a monotonous rhythm. She was almost finishing her shift when it happened. As she cleaned the handrail of an emergency staircase, a piece of paper fell from her pocket, a yellowed, folded fragment of a letter she always carried with her. Her only treasure, her only clue. She crouched to pick it up, her fingers trembling slightly. She always feared losing it. As she stood up, she saw the reflection. In the glass of the fire door, a figure, a masculine silhouette, watching. Not one of the usual residents or staff. Something in the posture, in the contained tension of that presence made Aurora freeze. When she turned, no one was there. Just the empty corridor and the dense silence of the building. But she knew. She knew who it was. The rest of the shift passed in a fog of controlled anxiety until the clock finally marked the end of her shift. Aurora changed quickly, tucking her uniform into the too small locker, grabbing her worn backpack. Normally, she would take the reverse route of her arrival. Service exit, bus stop, an hour and a half of public transport to the small apartment she shared with 2 other women in East London. But something made her hesitate at the door. Outside, relentless rain lashed the city. Aurora had no umbrella. She never had money for these small luxuries that made life more comfortable. Normally, she would run in the rain to the stop, accepting the fact that she would arrive home drenched. But there was something else that night, something beyond the rain that made her want to stay. She decided to wait a bit. Perhaps the rain would lessen. She sat on one of the plastic benches in the service area, now empty, except for a sleepy security guard at the post near the exit. She took out the paper she had almost lost, the letter fragment that was her greatest treasure and greatest mystery. It was only half a sheet, torn irregularly, as if someone had tried to destroy it in a hurry. The handwriting was elegant, old, almost calligraphic, written in dark blue ink. "My dearest Sybil," it began, and continued with broken, incomplete phrases. "When you grow up, you will understand why we had to. Your future depends on this silence. Never forget who you truly..." The key is where no one. When the time comes, you will know. The rest was lost forever, as was the sender. There was no signature on the part Aurora possessed. Sybil, a name that wasn't hers, but which sometimes seemed more real than Aurora. A name given to her by a social worker when she was found, at 9 years old, wandering alone and confused after the orphanage fire. She had no documents, couldn't remember her surname, couldn't say where her parents were. There was a blank period in her memory, a void between the ages of 6 and 9 that no psychologist had been able to fill. The letter was her only link to a past she couldn't access. She had found it sewn into the lining of an old doll she always carried with her, years later, when she finally had the courage to open it to see why it was so heavy. Who was Sybil? Was it herself? And who had written those enigmatic words? Lost in thought, Aurora was slow to realize that the service door had opened. When she looked up, her heart raced. A tall man drenched by the rain entered with determined steps. He was not an employee or a common resident. He wore a dark overcoat that seemed too expensive to be soaked like that, his black hair plastered to his face by the humidity, and a severe expression that seemed carved in marble. The security guard immediately went on alert. "Sir, this is the service entrance. The main entrance is—" "I know what the main entrance to my own building is, Cardoso," the man replied, with a deep, contained voice that didn't need to be raised to command authority. The security guard visibly paled. "Mr. Salvatore, sorry, I didn't recognize. With all this rain—" Dante Salvatore, the man from the penthouse, the ghost of 27. There, less than 10 feet from Aurora, dripping water onto the floor she had just cleaned. She should look away, feign invisibility as she always did in the presence of the powerful. But something kept her looking, observing details that the rumors never mentioned. He wasn't old as she imagined. In his early 30s, perhaps. He didn't have the sickly appearance of a recluse. On the contrary, he had the slightly tanned skin of someone who, despite everything, occasionally saw the sun. His posture was perfectly erect, almost military. But it was his eyes that captivated Aurora's attention, dark, almost black eyes with a disturbing intensity. Eyes that seemed to see through people beyond appearances, and now those eyes were fixed on her. "You, what are you doing here at this hour?" The question came like a blow, direct, without preamble. Aurora felt her throat go dry. It was the first time in 6 months that a resident had addressed her directly. "The rain," she began, her voice coming out lower than she intended. She hated how small she sounded when nervous. Salvatore continued to stare at her, as if trying to decipher some secret code on her face. Aurora felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't experienced in a long time. There was something in that gaze. It wasn't lust or contempt, the gazes she was used to. It was something more unsettling. Recognition. "You're the one who cleans the 23rd floor," he said, not a question but a statement. "The one who never speaks to anyone. How did he know that?" Aurora felt a chill run down her spine. So the rumors were true. He really did watch through the cameras. "Aurora," she said, surprising herself with the sudden courage to identify herself. "Aurora," he repeated, as if testing the name, rolling each syllable on his tongue. A curious name for someone who seems to prefer the shadows. The comment caught her off guard. There was a strange intimacy in that observation, as if he had truly noticed her, truly seen her beyond her uniform and function. The moment was broken by the shrill sound of an alarm. Red lights began to flash in the corridors, the deafening noise reverberating through the walls. The security guard immediately ran to the nearby control panel, checking the monitors. "Fire alarm in the basement, sir. Standard procedure is immediate evacuation," he shouted over the noise. Salvatore's face instantly transformed. The calculated expression gave way to something almost wild, a contained panic that Aurora would never imagine seeing in someone like him. "It's not a fire," he said, his voice now tense. "It's an intruder. Turn off that damn alarm and call for backup to the garage." Aurora didn't understand how he could be so sure, but the security guard didn't question, immediately grabbing his radio and giving orders. In seconds, the alarm was silenced, although the lights continued to flash. "You," Salvatore pointed at Aurora, "stay here. Don't leave until someone comes to get you." Before she could reply, he had already disappeared down the corridor towards the service elevator. The security guard, equally tense, followed in the opposite direction. presumably to find other members of the security team. Aurora was left alone, her heart pounding, the silence after the alarm almost as deafening as the noise. She knew she should obey, stay exactly where she was. It was procedure, it was safe, it was what was expected of someone in her position. But something was wrong. Something deeply wrong. The way Salvatore reacted. It wasn't just concern for security. It was something personal, visceral, and without knowing why, Aurora felt that somehow it had something to do with her. The same instinct that had kept her alive all these years now screamed within her. She made her decision in seconds. Instead of staying, she stood up and followed in the same direction Salvatore had taken. The service elevator indicated it was going down to the basement. Aurora knew another way, the emergency stairs that employees used when the elevators were busy. She descended the steps quickly, moving in the dark with the familiarity of someone who knew every inch of that building. The emergency lights flickered, creating ghostly shadows on the walls. The basement was a labyrinth of technical areas, storage rooms, and the immense garage that occupied 2 levels below ground. Aurora stopped at the last flight of stairs, listening. Raised voices echoed. One of them, Salvatore's, the other... Her blood ran cold. She knew that voice, but from where? You have no right to be here. Salvatore's voice sounded controlled, but with an underlying tremor of anger. Not after what happened. I have every right, replied the other voice, lower, hoarser. You know why I'm here. She's here, isn't she? I finally found her. I don't know what you're talking about. Salvatore's reply was cold as ice. Don't lie to me. Dante, I know you recognized her. Sybil, my daughter. Aurora felt the world stop. Sybil, the name from the letter. Her letter. Without realizing what she was doing, she descended the last flight of stairs and entered the garage. She saw Salvatore's back, confronting an older man with grey hair and simple clothes. A man whose face triggered a flash of memory so painful that her legs weakened. Sybil, the man exclaimed upon seeing her, his eyes lighting up with a mixture of joy and despair. My daughter! It's really you! Aurora felt the world spin. Fragmented images flooded her mind. A smiling face leaning over a crib, large gentle hands holding hers, a house with blue walls and a garden, a woman screaming, fire, so much fire. Her legs gave way. Aurora fell to her knees, the piece of letter still clutched in her hand, now stained by the sweat of her fingers. Her head throbbed with pain, memories trying to emerge from a dark abyss she had always feared exploring. Are you all right? Salvatore's voice sounded strangely close. When she opened her eyes, he was crouched beside her, a hesitant hand hovering near her shoulder without actually touching her. Don't touch me, she managed to say, recoiling instinctively. Panic grew within her, a panic that went beyond the moment, beyond that stranger who called her daughter, beyond the powerful man who seemed to know her without ever having spoken before. It was an ancient primal panic, the panic of someone who fears any human proximity, because she learned that touches bring pain. It's okay. No one will touch you, Salvatore said, with a voice strangely soft for someone with his intimidating reputation. There was something in his tone, understanding, that made Aurora focus on him instead of the stranger who kept calling her daughter. Why does he call me that? She asked, her voice trembling. Who is he? And how do you know me? The older man tried to approach, but Salvatore stood up with a fluid movement, interposing himself between them. Enough, Matthew. You're scaring her. Leave now or I'll have you removed. You don't understand, the man, Matthew pleaded. I've been looking for her for years. When the orphanage burned down, they said she died with the other children. But then I saw the report, I saw the list of survivors. A girl with no name, no memory. I knew it was her. I can't take it all. The scream escaped Aurora's lips before she could contain it, the unbearable pressure of fragmented memories forcing their way out. I'm not who you think I am. I'm not Sybil. I'm nobody's daughter. Her voice echoed in the empty garage, amplified by the concrete walls. Aurora rarely spoke. Screaming was something she hadn't done since childhood. The sound of her own voice, loud and desperate, frightened her as much as the 2 men watching her. Matthew recoiled, his eyes shining with contained tears. You don't remember anything? The garden. The songs your mother sang? The dog, Toby? Toby. The dog's name triggered another wave of pain and memory fragments, a brown, furry dog licking her face as she laughed. Aurora pressed her hands against her temples, as if she could force the memories into order. "Enough!" Salvatore's voice cut the air like a blade. "Security!" As if they had been waiting only for his call, 3 security guards emerged from the stairwell. Salvatore pointed at Matthew. "Escort this man out of the building. He is forbidden to enter again. If he tries, call the police immediately." "Dante, please," Matthew pleaded, as the security guards held him by the arms. "You know I'm telling the truth. You were there when it all happened." These words seemed to affect Salvatore more than anything else. For the first time, Aurora saw his controlled expression break for an instant, revealing something close to remorse. But the moment passed and the impassive mask returned to place. "Get him out of here," he ordered, and the security guards obeyed, dragging the man who continued to look at Aurora with a mixture of despair and hope that made something inside her twist painfully. When they were finally alone in the garage, Aurora was still on her knees on the cold floor. She felt exhausted, as if she had run miles. The adrenaline of the moment began to dissipate, leaving her trembling and confused. "How do you know me?" she asked again, her voice now a hoarse whisper. Salvatore remained standing a few steps away, respecting the space she clearly needed. His face was an unreadable mask, but there was something in his eyes, an intensity, a sadness perhaps, that made Aurora feel as if he could see through her. "You look like someone I knew," he finally replied, choosing his words carefully. "Someone who disappeared a long time ago." "The woman from apartment 13, Aurora said, without knowing how she knew it. It was as if a part of her mind had made a connection that the rest of her consciousness still didn't comprehend. The flaw that doesn't exist. The surprise on Salvatore's face confirmed she was right. "How do you know about that?" "I know many things about this building," she replied simply. "I observe, I listen. People rarely notice who cleans their messes." Salvatore studied her for a long moment, as if seeing her in a new light. "Diana had an affair with my father for years. My mother knew but pretended not to. The financial arrangement of their marriage was more important to her than fidelity. But then something changed. Diana began to make demands, threatened to expose everything. She spoke of having proof of irregularities in the family business. And then she disappeared," Aurora completed, feeling a chill run down her spine. "What does that have to do with me?" Salvatore stood up suddenly, walking to the window, his back to her, his profile outlined against the orange sky of the London evening. He looked like a figure from a dramatic painting, beautiful and tormented. "Diana had a daughter," he said so softly Aurora almost didn't hear. "A 6-year-old girl. No one knew who the father was. Matthew raised her as his own, but there were rumors. Rumors that the child might be my father's." Aurora felt the world stop. "Are you saying you think I'm that child? That I'm Diana's daughter?" Salvatore turned to face her. "I'm not saying I think. I'm saying I know. From the moment I first saw you in the building, I recognized Diana's eyes in you. The same green eyes that defied anyone who tried to control her." The revelation hit Aurora like a physical blow. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to process. Diana, her mother, a woman who had disappeared in this very building. A woman whose fate was somehow linked to the Salvatore family. "If you knew who I was from the beginning, why didn't you say anything? Why wait all these months?" "Because I wasn't absolutely sure until I saw your reaction to the name Sybil yesterday," he replied, sitting down again, now leaning forward, elbows resting on his knees. "And because I didn't know if it was safe. I still don't. Safe for whom? For you?" "For you." The answer came without hesitation. The circumstances of Diana's disappearance were never clarified. The police investigated, but without concrete evidence, without a body, the case was closed. My father was powerful, he had connections. And soon after, there was the fire at the orphanage where you were taken after being separated from your mother. The fire, Aurora repeated, memory fragments emerging, the heat, the screams, the smell of smoke and burning flesh. I was 9. I don't remember anything before that. The doctors said the trauma blocked my memories. Or perhaps someone ensured you wouldn't remember, Salvatore suggested, his voice laden with dark meaning. Aurora felt the nausea grow. Are you saying the fire wasn't accidental? That it was to silence me? The idea was too monstrous to contemplate. But I was just a child. What could I have known? What you saw, perhaps. What you witnessed. Salvatore stood up again, unable to remain seated. She noticed a pattern in his movements, the controlled restlessness, the need to keep moving. When Diana disappeared, you also vanished. For 3 years, no one knew where Sybil Noguera was. Then suddenly a girl with no memory appears in an orphanage, after being found wandering alone in the streets. A girl who doesn't remember her name or her past. Aurora felt tears burning but refused to let them fall. Why am I here now? Why do I work in this building? Is it some cruel coincidence? A coincidence. Salvatore gave a humorless laugh. I don't believe in coincidences. I believe in patterns, in connections. You are here because something within you brought you back to the place where it all began. Or perhaps because someone wanted you to come back. Matthew, Aurora said, understanding. He found me. He followed me. He never gave up looking for you. He never accepted the official story about Diana's disappearance. For years he has been trying to find evidence, reopen the case. Salvatore paused, his gaze intensifying. When my father died 2 years ago, Matthew returned to England. I think he hoped to find something he could use as evidence. And then somehow he discovered you were alive and working here. And you? Aurora asked, suspicion growing. What is your role in all this? Why tell me these things now? Salvatore approached, stopping a few steps away, respecting the personal space she so clearly needed. Because I'm tired of living surrounded by lies. Because when I saw you last night, when I saw your fear and your confusion, I recognized something of myself. Something broken that was never properly fixed. There was a vulnerability in his voice that Aurora didn't expect. Behind the controlled facade of the powerful man, there was someone who also carried deep scars. What happened to you? She asked, the question escaping before she could contain it. A heavy silence followed the question. Salvatore closed his eyes for a moment as if gathering strength. I was here, he finally replied. The day Diana disappeared. I was 17. I heard things, I saw things I tried to forget for years. He opened his eyes and there was palpable pain in them. I tried to help her. I tried to prevent what happened. And I failed. The confession hung between them like a specter. Aurora felt the room's temperature seem to drop several degrees. What did you see? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. Blood, he replied, the word coming out as if torn. So much blood. On the wall. On the carpet. And my father. With his hands, he stopped, unable to continue. Aurora closed her eyes, trying to contain the rising nausea. Fragmented images began to appear in her mind. A dark corridor, muffled screams. A tall man dragging something heavy. Were they real memories or just her mind filling in gaps with the newly acquired information? And the girl, Salvatore continued, his voice now more controlled. You hidden in the closet, seeing everything through the cracks. I found you before my father realized you were there. I managed to get you out of the apartment. You saved me, Aurora asked, confused. I tried. I gave you to Matthew, told him to run, never to come back. But he didn't go far enough. My father had eyes and ears everywhere. 3 days later, Matthew was found almost dead, beaten in an alley. The girl and Hewitt had disappeared. Aurora felt dizzy. She stood up abruptly, needing space, air. She walked to the window, looking at the city that stretched like an ocean of lights below. London, immense, indifferent to the small personal tragedies that occurred within its depths. Why didn't you go to the police? She asked without turning. I did, he replied, the bitterness evident. And want to know what happened. The detective called my father, even before taking my statement. 2 hours later, I was on a plane to Switzerland, admitted to a rest clinic that was practically a disguised prison. I stayed there for 3 years, diagnosed with psychotic episodes and persecutory delusions. When I finally broke free, the case was already closed, my father more powerful than ever, and you were considered dead, along with the other victims of the orphanage fire. Aurora turned slowly. And now, why would your father allow you to come back, to live in this same building, in the apartment above the crime scene? A crooked, almost cruel smile appeared on Salvatore's face. Because he believed he had completely broken me, and because in the years that followed, I built my own fortune, my own power. I returned not as the problematic son, but as an equal. A rival, he paused significantly, and then he died, officially a heart attack in his sleep. The implication hung in the air, heavy, unspoken but clearly present. Aurora studied the man in front of her. There was something different in his gaze now, something dangerous that reminded her of the predator he could be. "You?" She couldn't complete the question. "No," Salvatore replied. "Not directly. Let's just say I didn't lift a finger to save him when I had the opportunity. And I felt nothing but relief when they issued the death certificate." A dense silence settled between them. Aurora tried to process everything she had heard, all the revelations that completely reshaped her understanding of herself and her past. "Why was I hired to work here?" she finally asked. "If my presence could be dangerous, why allow me into this building?" "I didn't hire you," Salvatore replied, his brow furrowed. "In fact, I only knew you were working here when I saw you on the security cameras about 2 months ago. It was disturbing, to say the least, like seeing a ghost. Then who hired me? Who could know who I really am?" "That's the question that has kept me awake since I recognized you," he said, his intense gaze fixed on her. "Someone knows who you are. Someone brought you back deliberately. And we need to find out who and why before it's too late." The gravity of his words hit Aurora with full force. It wasn't just about discovering her past now. It was about survival. "The key," she said, suddenly remembering. "In the torn letter I found with me, it mentioned a key. The key is where no one—" "The rest is torn." Salvatore's eyes widened slightly. "You still have that letter?" Aurora nodded, reaching into the pocket where she kept the precious fragment. She carefully took it out and extended it to Salvatore, who took it with an almost religious reverence. "It's her handwriting," he confirmed, his fingers trembling slightly as he touched the paper. "I'd recognize it anywhere." "What do you think she meant about the key?" Salvatore returned the paper carefully. "I don't know. But if Diana hid something, some evidence, some secret, it's possible it's still in this building. And apartment 13, perhaps." "The floor that doesn't officially exist," Aurora repeated. "How can we get in there?" "We can't, at least not easily. After the incident, the floor was completely sealed off. The building plans were altered. Officially, it goes directly from the 12th to the 14th floor." Salvatore paused, considering something. "But there's another way to access it, through the ventilation and maintenance ducts. I've explored every inch of this building over the years, looking for answers." Aurora felt a shiver. The idea of entering the place where apparently her mother had been killed was terrifying. But she also knew she would never find peace without confronting that past. "When?" she asked simply. Salvatore seemed surprised by her determination. "Not today. We need preparation, planning. And you need time to process all this." Aurora nodded, feeling the weight of the day's emotional exhaustion finally hit her. She stood up, ready to leave, to return to her small, safe world, even if temporarily. "Don't go home tonight," Salvatore said, surprising her. Seeing her expression, he quickly added, "I'm not suggesting you stay here. I have an empty apartment on the 22nd floor. It's safer than your current address. Matthew knows who you are now, and he's not the only one who might be interested in your reappearance." "Who else would know about me?" Aurora asked, her anxiety growing. "Anyone involved in Diana's disappearance, anyone who had something to lose if the truth came out." Salvatore approached a little closer, still maintaining a respectful distance. "There are powerful people in this city who would do anything to keep certain secrets buried. My father didn't act alone." Aurora considered the offer. Staying in Salvatore's apartment meant trusting him at least partially, and trust was not something she granted easily. On the other hand, the idea of returning to her small shared apartment, vulnerable, now that she knew powerful people might be watching her, was equally disturbing. "Can I think about it?" she finally replied. "Of course," Salvatore nodded. "But don't take too long. From the moment you left that garage last night, a clock started ticking. People are paying attention now. People who would prefer Sybil Noguera to remain dead." The grim reality of her situation weighed on Aurora like a concrete slab. Just 24 hours ago, she was just an anonymous, invisible employee, living day by day in an exhausting but predictable routine. Now she was a piece in a dangerous game that had begun 15 years earlier. "I'll consider your offer," she said finally. "Thank you for the answers." Salvatore nodded slightly. "There's more, much more, but for today it's enough." He hesitated for a moment as if wanting to say something else, but thought better of it. "Be careful, Aurora, or Sybil. Whoever you choose to be now. The implied question hit her hard. Who would she choose to be? Aurora, the pastless girl raised in orphanages, a solitary survivor, or Sybil, Diana's daughter, the girl who had witnessed unimaginable horrors and survived to tell the tale? Perhaps she didn't need to choose yet. Perhaps she could be both, at least for now. As she left Salvatore's apartment, descending the private elevator he had unlocked for her, Aurora felt strangely conflicted. Part of her wanted to flee, leave London, abandon everything and start over somewhere else with another name. But another part, a part that grew with each passing minute, wanted to stay and fight, to discover the whole truth, to find justice for Diana, for herself. The elevator stopped in the main lobby, a space rarely visited by Aurora in her cleaning uniform. At this hour of the night it was almost empty, except for a sleepy security guard and a solitary figure sitting on one of the elegant sofas near the entrance. A figure she recognized immediately, Matthew, the man who claimed to be her father. He was dressed more carefully than the previous night, in simple but dignified clothes. He seemed calmer, more controlled. When he saw her, he stood up but didn't approach, as if fearing to scare her again. Aurora froze for a moment, undecided. Part of her wanted to run, avoid him, but another part, the part seeking answers, kept her still. Aurora, he corrected himself, his voice contained. Forgive me for yesterday, I lost control. It was a shock after so many years of searching. How did you find me? She asked directly, keeping her distance. Matthew hesitated. A social worker. From the fire records, she helped me connect the dots between the girl with no memory and my missing daughter. For money, Aurora guessed. A sad smile appeared on Matthew's aged face. Yes, for money. I spent everything I had to find you. Why? Why now after so many years? Because it was finally safe, he replied, looking nervously at the security cameras in the lobby. Or at least safer. Charles Salvatore is dead. Some of the others too. The remaining ones are older, less vigilant. The others? Aurora questioned. Who else was involved? Matthew looked around again, clearly uncomfortable speaking there. Not here. It's not safe. He took a small card from his pocket and held it out to her. My number. When you're ready to hear the whole story, my version of the story, not a Salvatore's, call me. I'll be waiting. Aurora took the card automatically, putting it in her pocket. There was sincerity in Matthew's eyes, an old pain that seemed genuine. But there were also years of separation between them, years in which she had built an entire life without him, without memories of him. I need time, she finally said. I understand, Matthew nodded. I've waited 15 years. I can wait a little longer. He took a step back as if to give her space. But be careful with him. With Dante Salvatore, he's not as different from his father as he'd like you to believe. With those words, he turned and left the building, leaving Aurora alone with more questions than answers. Outside, the London night embraced the city in its cloak of artificial lights and deep shadows. Aurora stood in the lobby for a few moments, feeling the weight of the choices ahead of her. Go home, accept the apartment offered by Salvatore, or find a third way. A certainty formed in her mind. She could not continue to be invisible. Not anymore. Fate, or something more sinister, had brought her back to the Cassian Tower for a reason, and now she needed to discover what that reason was, before she became just another victim of that place's secrets. With firm steps, she headed for the exit. As she passed through the automatic doors, she felt the night air on her face like a promise. Of danger, yes, but also of truth. Of liberation. For 15 years she had lived as Aurora, the girl without a past. Perhaps it was time to discover who Sybil truly was, and what had happened to Diana Noguera in the mysterious apartment 13. Above her, from the 27th floor, a solitary silhouette watched her departure. Dante Salvatore, with a glass of whiskey finally in hand, contemplated the city and the small figure moving away from his building. His face, normally so controlled, revealed a complex emotion, something between concern, guilt, and surprisingly an almost painful vulnerability. Find her, he said into the phone, his voice again cold and authoritative. Don't let her out of your sight for a second. And if anyone approaches her, anyone, you know what to do. He hung up, took a long sip of whiskey, and closed his eyes. The dangerous dance had begun, and this time he was determined not to fail in protecting her. Even if it meant confronting demons, he had kept locked away for 15 long years, even if it meant risking everything he had built, even if it meant looking again into the green eyes that haunted him so much, Diana's eyes now on her daughter's face. Aurora didn't go home that night. The decision came not so much as a conscious choice, but as a survival instinct that had guided her entire life. After leaving the Cassian Tower, she walked for almost an hour through the streets of central London, changing direction randomly, entering and exiting underground stations, always watching to see if she was being followed. It was a technique she had learned in her years in shelters, when she temporarily ran away to breathe away from suffocating rules and predatory gazes. She took a taxi to a cheap hotel on St. John's Avenue, the kind of place that accepted cash and asked no questions. She used almost all of her emergency savings, money she had saved for months for eventualities that, until then, had never been as urgent as now. The room was tiny, with a single bed, a cramped bathroom and a single window that overlooked a brick wall. But it had a lock, and that was all that mattered at that moment. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Aurora took her black notebook from her backpack and began to write. Not feelings or conjectures, but facts. Everything she had discovered in the last 24 hours, organizing it chronologically, connecting dots, looking for patterns. Diana Nogueira, her mother. Art consultant. Charles Salvatore's lover. Disappeared 15 years ago from apartment 13 of the Cassian Tower. Matthew Nogueira, her supposed father. Charles Salvatore's personal assistant. Beaten after trying to flee with her. Dante Salvatore, Charles's son. Witness to the crime. Interned for 3 years in a psychiatric clinic in Switzerland after trying to report his father. And herself, Aurora. Or Sybil, a girl who witnessed her own mother's murder at the age of 6, who disappeared for 3 years and reappeared without memory, who survived a possibly criminal fire, who grew up in institutions, who somehow ended up working in the same building where it all began. Coincidence? Salvatore's words echoed in her mind. I don't believe in coincidences. Who had hired her to work at the Cassian Tower? Who knew who she really was? And what did that person want? As she wrote, fragments of memories emerged. They weren't clear or linear, just impressions, sensations, flashes. A dark-haired woman singing softly while painting. The smell of oil paint and turpentine. A brown dog licking her face. A garden with red flowers. And more disturbingly, muffled screams. The sound of something heavy falling. The darkness of a closet. Looking through the cracks. She closed the notebook when the morning light began to filter through the small window. She hadn't slept, but she felt strangely alert, as if every cell in her body was in a heightened state of consciousness. She took a quick shower, dressed again in the same uniform from the day before, and left. She had no concrete plan, just the certainty that she couldn't simply go back to her old routine. She called Marlene from a public phone at a bakery where she had coffee. I can't come to work today, she said as soon as the supervisor answered, her voice firmer than usual. Personal matters. Aurora! Marlene sounded genuinely surprised. In 6 months, Aurora had never missed work, never asked for a day off. Are you all right? Did something happen after you cleaned Mr. Salvatore's apartment? The question was laden with insinuation. Aurora could almost see Marlene's suspicious expression on the other end of the line. I'm fine. I just need a day. There was a significant pause. All right, Marlene finally replied, but I want you here on time tomorrow. And if Mr. Salvatore calls asking about you, what should I say? Aurora hadn't considered that possibility. Salvatore probably expected her to accept his offer of the empty apartment. Tell him the truth. That I asked for the day off. After hanging up, Aurora stood on the busy sidewalk, watching the constant flow of hurried Londoners, all with their own concerns, their own stories, their own invisible struggles. How strange it was to feel simultaneously so connected and so distant from everything. She spent the morning in a public library, searching old newspaper archives for any mention of Diana Nogueira, the orphanage fire, the Salvatore family. She found less than she expected. Diana's disappearance had generated a few small articles at the time, quickly replaced by other scandals, other tragedies. The orphanage fire received greater coverage. 22 children dead, 7 staff, a tragedy that shocked the city for a few days before being forgotten. Nothing connected the two events. Nothing mentioned a survivor with no memory. Nothing about the Salvatore family's involvement. But in a small, almost irrelevant photo of a charity event held 2 weeks before Diana's disappearance, Aurora found something. In the caption, among the names of the distinguished guests, Charles and Dante Salvatore, accompanied by art consultant Diana Nogueira. And there she was, an elegant woman with dark hair and penetrating green eyes that Aurora recognized immediately, for they were the same ones she saw in the mirror every morning. With trembling fingers, she made a copy of the page. Looking at her mother's face for the first time in 15 years, or at least the first time she remembered, was like receiving an electric shock. Something deep and primal within her recognized that face, that contained smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Next to Diana, an older man, Charles Salvatore, presumably with an arrogant, authoritative expression, and a young man, still almost a teenager, with dark, intense eyes that already carried a shadow that the adult Aurora recognized well in Dante. Leaving the library, Aurora made a decision. She needed to speak with Matthew Nogueira. She needed to hear his version of the story. Not because she trusted him, she trusted no one at this point, but because she needed more pieces for the fragmented puzzle of her past. The card he had given her had only a phone number. No address, no additional identification. From the same phone booth where she had called Marlene, she dialed the number. "Hello?" Matthew's voice sounded cautious, as if expecting bad news. "It's me," Aurora said simply. "I want to talk." An audible sigh from the other end. "Thank God. I was worried after you left with Salvatore yesterday." A pause. "Where can we meet?" "It has to be a public, safe place." Aurora had already considered this. "Hyde Park, near the lake next to the Serpentine Gallery. 1 o'clock. "I'll be there," Matthew replied, and Aurora could hear relief and anxiety mixed in his voice. She hung up and took the next bus to Hyde Park. The park was one of the few places in London where one could breathe relatively clean air, surrounded by the greenery that was so rare in the city's suffocating concrete. On a typical weekday, it wouldn't be too crowded, safe enough for a private conversation, public enough to avoid problems. Matthew was already waiting when she arrived, sitting on a bench overlooking the lake. He wore simple but clean clothes and seemed to have made an effort to look presentable. When he saw her, he stood up but didn't approach, respecting the distance she clearly wished to maintain. "Thank you for coming," he said as she sat on the same bench, leaving a considerable space between them. "I didn't come for you," Aurora replied directly. "I came for myself. I need to know the truth." Matthew nodded, his tired eyes fixed on the lake ahead. "Where do you want me to start?" "Diana," Aurora said. "My mother. How did you two meet? How did she get involved with the Salvatores?" A sad smile appeared on Matthew's aged face. "I met Diana at university. I studied business administration, she fine arts. She was the most brilliant, most intense woman I ever knew." He paused, lost in memories. "We married young, against her family's wishes. They wanted someone with money, status. I was just a poor student from a rural English county. And then came you," he continued, his voice softening. "Sybil, our little star." Diana chose the name. She said you had the eyes of an ancient seer, that you saw more than others. Another pause. "Those were financially difficult years, but happy ones. Diana began to make a name for herself as an art critic, a consultant for small galleries, until Charles Salvatore noticed her at an exhibition and hired her," Aurora completed. Matthew nodded. "To reorganize the family art collection, initially. The money was good, better than anything we had dreamed of. And then he offered me a job too, as his personal assistant." A heavy sigh. "That's how it started. Gradually, little by little. Their affair." Yes, the word came out laden with old pain. "At first I denied the signs. Then I confronted her. We fought, we almost separated. But there was you and the life we built together." He looked at Aurora with intensity. "I need you to understand. Diana wasn't a social climber or a gold digger. She truly fell in love with him, or at least with what she thought he was. Charles Salvatore could be incredibly charming when he wanted to be." Aurora absorbed the information in silence. It was strange to hear about her mother like this, as a real woman with flaws and complexities, not just a victim or a name in a torn letter. "What went wrong?" she finally asked. "Why did she disappear?" Matthew closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. Diana discovered things about Charles's business, about his connections. The Salvatore family didn't build its empire solely on legitimate investments. There was money laundering, bribes to politicians, connections to organized crime, and she confronted him. Worse, Matthew said, opening his eyes again. She gathered evidence. Documents, recordings, transfer records. Charles had trusted her too much, let her see too much. Diana always had a strong sense of justice, of right and wrong. When she realized the extent of the corruption, she decided to expose everything. And that's why she was killed, Aurora concluded, her voice low. Yes, but not immediately. There were threats first, attempts to buy her off, then to intimidate her. Matthew looked directly at Aurora. That's when we decided to flee, to take you away. We had everything planned. False passports, hidden money, a place to stay abroad. But the night before our escape, Diana insisted on returning to the Cassian Tower one last time. She said she had hidden something there, something we couldn't leave behind. The evidence against Charles. Exactly. I stayed with you at home waiting. She never came back. Matthew's voice faltered. When I realized something had gone wrong, it was already too late. I rushed to the building but couldn't get in. The next day, when I finally gained access, there was nothing. No sign of Diana, as if she had never been there. And me? Aurora asked. How did I end up there that night? Matthew frowned. You weren't there. You were with me at home. Aurora felt a chill run down her spine. Dante Salvatore told me he found me hidden in a closet. That I saw everything. The surprise on Matthew's face seemed genuine. That's impossible. You were with me all night. When I realized Diana wouldn't be back, I attempted our emergency escape. We managed to get out of the city, but they found us 3 days later. They beat me almost to death. When I woke up in the hospital, you had disappeared. The contradictory versions made Aurora's head spin. Someone was lying. Or perhaps both believed their own versions, shaped by years of trauma and guilt. What happened next? She asked. How did you find me now after all these years? I never stopped looking, Matthew replied simply. Even after they said you had died in the fire, something inside me knew it wasn't true. When Charles Salvatore died, I returned to England. I started researching the records of the orphanage that burned down. I found reports about a girl with no memory, approximately your age. So I followed the lead. I bribed a social worker to see your photo. It was you. And Diana? Do you have any proof of what happened to her? Matthew shook his head. Only circumstantial. Her disappearance, the previous threats, the timing. But the body was never found. It's as if she simply vanished. Apartment 13, Aurora murmured. The key she mentioned in the letter. You have a letter from her? Matthew asked, suddenly alert. Aurora hesitated before confirming. Her piece. It was with me when they found me wandering after the fire. It mentions a hidden key. Matthew's eyes gleamed with a mixture of hope and anxiety. It could be the key to the evidence she gathered. If it still exists somewhere, we need to get into apartment 13, Aurora said more to herself than to Matthew. It's impossible. The floor was completely sealed off after her disappearance. It doesn't even appear on the official building plans now. There's a way. Aurora thought of what Salvatore had told her about the ventilation ducts, the alternative paths he had discovered over years of solitary investigation. But I'll need help. My help? Matthew asked, hopeful. Aurora looked at him for a long time, assessing. Part of her wanted to trust this man who claimed to be her father, who carried such genuine pain in his eyes. But another part, the part that had survived alone all these years, hesitated. The inconsistencies between his story and Salvatore's were disturbing. Not yet, she finally replied. I need to verify some things first. We can meet again tomorrow, same place, same time. The disappointment on Matthew's face was palpable, but he nodded. I'll be here always. He hesitated, then added, Be careful, Sybil. Dante Salvatore is not who he seems to be. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Aurora stood up to leave, then stopped. Do you have any photos of her, of Diana? Matthew reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a worn wallet. From inside, he took out a small folded photo protected by plastic. He held it out to Aurora. I always carried it with me, to never forget why I keep fighting. The photo showed a young woman smiling with a small child on her lap. The same woman Aurora had seen in the newspaper photo, but here more relaxed, happier. And the child, Herself at 3 or 4 years old, with curious eyes and a carefree smile she no longer recognized in herself. "Can I keep this?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "It's yours now," Matthew replied. "It always was." Aurora carefully placed the photo in her black notebook and left, leaving Matthew alone on the park bench, their solitary figure watching the lake with eyes that had seen too much. Leaving the park, Aurora made her decision. She needed to return to the Cassian Tower. She needed to speak with Salvatore again. And this time, she would demand more than half-truths. She took the underground to the city center, her mind working incessantly, connecting dots, evaluating possibilities, calculating risks. When she emerged at the station nearest the Cassian Tower, the sun was already beginning to set, painting the skyscrapers in orange hues that contrasted with the growing shadows. As she approached the building, she noticed something strange. There was unusual movement at the main entrance. Police cars and ambulance people gathered watching. Her pulse quickened. Keeping her distance, Aurora approached a small group of onlookers. "What happened?" she asked a woman who was observing the scene with the morbid fascination typical of those witnessing other people's tragedies. "A suicide, it seems," the woman replied without looking away. "Someone jumped. Or was pushed, who knows? From which floor?" "From the top. The penthouse," they said. Aurora felt her blood run cold. The penthouse? Dante Salvatore's apartment? She recoiled instinctively, mingling with the crowd, her brain processing the implications with chilling clarity. If Salvatore was dead, who had killed him and why? Was it because he had spoken to her, revealed secrets that should remain buried? Or was it someone else, someone who had discovered something dangerous, someone who knew too much? She needed to know. But she couldn't simply enter the building through the main entrance, not with police everywhere. She knew another entrance, though, the service entrance where employees entered and exited daily unnoticed. Rounding the block, she reached the side of the building. The service entrance was guarded, as always, by a single security guard, usually bored and inattentive. Today, however, the man seemed tense, alert. She recognized him, Victor, one of the older security guards. "Aurora?" He seemed genuinely surprised to see her. "Weren't you off today?" "I forgot something in the changing room," she lied easily. "Can I quickly go in and get it?" Victor hesitated, looking nervously at the radio on his belt. "I don't know if it's a good idea. There's a commotion upstairs." "The resident—" "I heard," she interrupted. "A suicide?" "We don't know yet." Victor lowered his voice. "The security staff are saying it was an accident, but the police are treating it as a crime scene. Either way, the boss won't like having staff wandering around while they investigate." "Please, Victor. It's important. I'll just go to the changing room and leave. I won't even go above the basement." The security guard sighed, giving in. "All right, but be quick and discreet." "And you didn't see me, understood?" Aurora nodded, grateful, and quickly passed through the metal detector and service doors. Once inside the building, however, she did not head to the changing room. Instead, she took the service elevator to the 26th floor. If someone had killed Salvatore, they might be after her too. She needed to find out what had really happened. And, more importantly, she needed to verify if Dante was actually dead. The 26th floor was silent, the corridors empty. From the internal staircase leading to Salvatore's apartment, Aurora could hear voices, police probably, investigating the spot from where the victim had supposedly fallen. She hesitated. Going up would be extremely risky. She could be caught, questioned, possibly implicated somehow. On the other hand, if Dante was dead, she had lost her main connection to the truth about her past. She needed to know. As she pondered, a hand emerged from the shadows of the corridor, covering her mouth to stifle a scream. A strong arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her back into a door she hadn't noticed was ajar. Instinctively, Aurora struggled, fighting against the unknown assailant. Years of survival in hostile environments had taught her never to be easily overpowered. "Stop, it's me." The low, grave voice in her ear was unmistakable. Dante Salvatore, alive. He loosened his grip as soon as he felt Aurora relax, releasing her immediately. They were in an empty apartment, probably the same one he had offered her the night before. The lights were off, the curtains closed. The only illumination came from a crack in what seemed to be a bathroom door. "I thought you were dead," Aurora said as soon as she caught her breath. Her voice low but intense. That was the intention, Salvatore replied, equally low. His face was partially illuminated by the faint light, revealing a cut on his temple and the beginning of a bruise on his jaw. Someone entered my apartment this morning, professional, knew how to disable alarms, knew the camera blind spots. Who? Aurora asked, moving closer to examine his injuries better. I didn't see his face. He wore a mask. We fought. He was good, trained, disciplined. Military, perhaps, or ex-police. Salvatore touched the side of his head where dried blood formed a crust. I managed to escape through the maintenance access. I left my watch near the balcony to make it look like I fell or jumped. It worked, apparently. Why? Why would someone try to kill you now? Because of you, he replied directly, his dark eyes fixed on hers. Because I spoke to you. Because I started stirring up things that should remain buried. Aurora felt the weight of guilt. I'm sorry. Don't be. I chose this when I decided to tell you the truth. He paused. Where have you been today? I looked for you. I was worried when I heard you didn't show up for work. I needed to think, to process everything. She hesitated before adding, and I met Matthew Noguera. Salvatore's expression hardened. What did he say? To see his version of the story. That Diana discovered secrets about your father's business, gathered evidence, and that's why she was killed. Aurora carefully studied Salvatore's reaction. He also said I wasn't in the apartment that night, that I was with him at home. A tense silence settled between them. He's lying, Salvatore finally said. I saw you there. I took you out of the closet where you were hiding. Why would he lie about that? A guilt, perhaps? For not having protected you adequately, or... Salvatore paused, considering something. Or because he's involved somehow. Because he doesn't want you to remember what you really saw. Suggesting what? That Matthew had something to do with Diana's disappearance? His own wife? People kill those they love for more trivial reasons than billionaire secrets and power, Salvatore replied, a clear bitterness in his voice. You said he has a photo of you with Diana. May I see it? Aurora hesitated before taking the photo from her notebook and handing it to Salvatore. He examined it under the faint light, his face tense with concentration. This photo was taken at my father's beach house in Brighton, he said slowly. See the detail of the balcony in the background? It's unmistakable. Diana never went there with Matthew, only with my father. And you, he paused, looking more closely. You look older than 3 or 4 here. And your hair... Aurora moved closer to see what he had noticed. In the photo, the child and herself had light brown hair, almost blonde. My hair has always been dark, she said, confused. Exactly. Salvatore handed her back the photo. This isn't you, Aurora. It's another child. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. But who? I don't know. But Matthew is lying about something fundamental. The question is why. Aurora put the photo away, her mind spinning with new possibilities, new doubts. We need to get into apartment 13, she said abruptly. You mentioned access through the ventilation ducts. Salvatore nodded slowly. It's possible. Dangerous, but possible. There's a maintenance entrance on the 12th floor that leads to a vertical shaft. With the right equipment, it could be climbed to the 13th. When? Not today. There are too many police in the building, investigating my supposed death. And we need to prepare properly. Tomorrow then, Aurora insisted. We can't wait any longer. If someone tried to kill you today, they'll try again. And they might come after me, too. Salvatore studied her for a long moment. You don't seem scared by that possibility. I'm not, she replied honestly. I've spent my whole life being chased by ghosts I didn't even know existed. Now at least I know what I'm fighting against. Something changed in Salvatore's gaze, a newfound respect, perhaps, or a deeper understanding of who Aurora truly was. Not a passive victim, but a determined survivor. All right, he agreed. Tomorrow night, after the building is quieter, when most residents are asleep. We can enter through the maintenance access in the basement, where there are fewer cameras. I need to go back to my apartment first, Aurora said, thinking of her notebook, the notes she had made over the months about the Cassian Tower's secrets. There's something there that can help us. It's not safe. If someone knows who you are, your apartment will be the first place they look. I have to risk it. My roommates will be worried if I don't show up. And I need to pick up some things. Salvatore seemed ready to argue, but something in Aurora's determination made him reconsider. Don't go alone. I have someone trustworthy who can accompany you. A driver, ex-security. He'll take you and wait, ensuring no one follows you. I don't need a babysitter, Aurora protested. It's not a babysitter. It's protection. Salvatore's voice hardened. People have died, Aurora. Diana died. And today someone tried to kill me. This isn't a game. The intensity in his eyes made Aurora recoil a little. He was right, of course. She was dealing with dangerous people, willing to kill to protect their secrets. All right, she agreed. But I want to be back here before nightfall. Agreed. Michael will meet you at the corner of Oxford Street and Tottenham Court Road in an hour. Black car license plate ending in 4927. He'll say breakfast is served. You reply, I prefer tea, understood. Aurora nodded, internally appreciating the level of precaution. And you? What will you do in the meantime? I'll prepare what we need for tomorrow, and I'll try to find out who attacked me this morning. I have some ideas, some contacts to check. A silence fell between them, not exactly comfortable but not tense either. It was a silence of mutual recognition, of two people who had been thrown together by circumstances beyond their control, united by a shared search for truth. Why are you helping me? Aurora finally asked, the question that had been on her mind from the beginning. Why do you care so much about what happened to Diana, about what happened to me? Salvatore looked away, fixing his gaze on some distant point beyond the covered window. Diana was kind to me when few were. She saw beyond Charles Salvatore's problematic son. She saw a scared boy trying to survive in a cruel and corrupt world. He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. And when it all happened, when I saw what my father had done, I couldn't save her. I couldn't stop it. But I saved you. And then, 3 years later, when I heard about the fire, when they said you had died with the other children, his voice faltered momentarily. I've lived with that guilt for 15 years. The guilt of not having done enough, of having failed you just as I failed Diana. The raw vulnerability in his confession caught Aurora off guard. Behind the controlled and powerful facade, there was a man who carried his own set of scars, his own baggage of unresolved traumas. You were just a teenager, she said softly. Against a man like your father, what could you have done? More, he replied simply. We can always do more. Aurora felt a strange connection with Salvatore at that moment, a shared understanding of what it's like to live haunted by the past, pursued by painful memories and impossible choices. Without thinking, she moved closer to him, not to touch him, touches were still difficult for her, but to be nearer, to offer proximity as a kind of comfort. Salvatore seemed to notice the gesture for what it was. His gaze met hers, a silent communication passing between them. There was an intensity there, a current of something unsaid, unrecognized. I should go, Aurora finally said, breaking the moment. Michael will be waiting. Salvatore nodded, returning to his more controlled posture. Be careful. Don't trust anyone, not even Michael. Observe, be alert, and be back before nightfall. I will, she promised. And tomorrow we'll finally find out what happened in apartment 13. Yes, he agreed, a somber tone in his voice. Finally, we'll face the ghosts. Aurora left first, checking if the corridor was empty before heading to the service elevator. As she descended to the ground floor, a strange calm enveloped her. For the first time in her life, she wasn't simply reacting to events beyond her control. She was acting, moving towards answers, towards the truth. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. Outside, the London night settled like a cloak of dotted lights against the darkening sky. Aurora walked with renewed purpose, aware that each step took her deeper into a 15-year unsolved mystery. And tomorrow, perhaps, she would finally discover who Sybil Noguera truly was, and what had happened to Diana in the apartment that officially did not exist. Above, watching her departure from a darkened window, Dante Salvatore remained motionless as a statue. His face, partially illuminated by the distant city glow, revealed a complexity of emotions, determination, concern, and something more, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Something dangerously close to hope. With deliberate movement, he picked up the phone and dialed a number few knew. I found her, he said simply, when someone answered on the other end. Diana's daughter. She's alive. A pause as he listened to the reply. Yes, I'm sure. Another pause. No, she doesn't remember. Not completely. But she's starting to connect the dots. Another pause longer. We're going into apartment 13 tomorrow night. Perhaps we'll finally find out what really happened. What Diana really hid. He hung up, putting the phone in his pocket. His eyes returned to the window, to the city that held so many secrets, so many lies, so many truths obscured by time and power. This time will be different, he murmured to himself, a solitary promise echoing in the shadows. This time I won't fail you. It wasn't clear if he was speaking to Diana, to Aurora, or to himself. Perhaps to all three. What was clear, however, was that events set in motion 15 years ago were finally approaching their conclusion. And when it was all over, nothing would be the same. Michael was exactly as Aurora had imagined, a man of few words, a massive body like a concrete wall, eyes constantly assessing the environment for threats. The black car slid through London's chaotic traffic with the precision of someone accustomed to escaping pursuits. They exchanged no more than the agreed-upon password, and the silence between them was dense but not uncomfortable. From the car window, Aurora watched the city she knew so well, and which at the same time seemed strange to her now, as if she was seeing it through a new lens, one that revealed traps and dangers where before there had only been the familiar indifference of the metropolis. The sun set over the skyscrapers, transforming the mirrored windows into golden and crimson panels, creating a spectacle of beauty that contrasted with the darkness of the secrets she was about to unearth. When they arrived at the building where Aurora lived, Michael parked at a safe distance. "I'll be watching," he said, his first words since the password exchange. "If I notice anything suspicious, we'll leave immediately. 15 minutes, no more." Aurora nodded. It was enough time to get what she needed and leave some kind of explanation for her flatmates. 15 minutes to separate herself from her life as Aurora, the anonymous cleaner of the Cassian Tower, before fully diving into the mysteries of Sybil Noguera. The apartment was empty when she entered. Lucy would be at the supermarket working, and Jane probably still at the call center. Aurora moved quickly through the small space, gathering some clothes, essential documents, the black notebook with her notes on the Cassian Tower, and the old doll from which she had taken the letter fragment years ago. She examined it again, looking for other hiding places she might have missed, tearing seams, checking every inch of the faded fabric. Her nothing but the small burn mark on the back, a scar from the fire just like the one she carried in her soul. She wrote a quick note for her flatmates. "Had to travel urgently. Family matters. Don't worry. Left this month's rent in the drawer. Aurora." A half-truth that would suffice for now. If all went well, she would return in a few days and explain in person. If not, well, she had learned early on that goodbyes were rarely luxuries granted to people like her. She was about to leave when she heard the sound, subtle, almost imperceptible, the slight creak of a floorboard in the corridor. Someone was outside the apartment. She froze, her survival instinct immediately on high alert. The sound did not repeat, but Aurora knew she was not alone. Years of living in precarious situations had sharpened her senses, creating an internal radar for danger that rarely failed. She looked at the window. They were on the 4th floor, too high for an escape. The only exit was the door where someone waited. Michael was outside in the car, but there was no way to alert him. She was alone, as she always had been in the crucial moments of her life. Silently, she moved to the tiny kitchen, grabbing the largest knife she found. It wasn't an ideal weapon, but it was better than nothing. With her backpack on her back and the knife hidden in her jacket sleeve, she approached the door, mentally, preparing for the confrontation that seemed inevitable. She took a deep breath and opened the door abruptly. The corridor was empty. Confused, Aurora looked both ways. No one in sight. Was she becoming paranoid? The stress and adrenaline of the past few days finally affecting her perception. She decided not to wait to find out. She quickly exited, locking the door and descending the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator. At each turn, each landing, she expected to find someone, but the building was strangely silent at that time of day. Upon reaching the ground floor, she saw Michael through the glass of the main door, still in the car, watching. She felt momentarily relieved, but then noticed the tense expression on the man's face, his eyes fixed not on her, but on something to her right. Aurora followed his gaze and saw, standing near the building entrance, pretending to check mail. An ordinary-looking man, so ordinary that he would be easily forgotten. Discreet clothing, relaxed posture, nothing to draw attention, except for his eyes. Cold, calculating eyes, which now turned in her direction with immediate recognition. She didn't think twice. Instead of leaving through the main door, she turned and ran towards the back of the building, where there was an emergency exit that led to an alley. She heard footsteps behind her. The man was following her, abandoning any pretense of disguise. The alley was narrow, damp, filled with dumpsters and debris that made passage difficult. Aurora ran with the familiarity of someone who knew every obstacle, every possible shortcut. Years of cleaning at the Cassian Tower had strengthened her muscles more than she realized. She was fast, agile, determined. But her pursuer was too, and he was gaining ground. She turned a tight corner, knowing it would lead to a busier street where she could blend into the crowd. She was only 10 meters from the relative safety of the public road when she felt fingers grab her jacket, pulling her back with brutal force. The impact against the brick wall expelled the air from her lungs. Before she could catch her breath, a strong hand squeezed her throat, lifting her a few inches off the ground. The man's face was close to hers now, grey eyes devoid of emotion, like those of a predator focused only on prey. "Sybil Noguera," he said, his voice as cold as his eyes. "Finally." "Who are you?" Aurora managed to ask, struggling for air, her fingers discreetly sliding to the sleeve where she had hidden the knife. "Someone who should have finished the job 15 years ago," he replied, increasing the pressure. "There will be no mistakes this time." Aurora felt consciousness beginning to darken at the edges. It was now or never. With a sudden movement, she pulled out the knife and struck, not to kill but to wound, to gain time. The blade hit the man's arm, making him let out a muffled cry of pain and surprise. The pressure on her throat lessened enough for her to escape, staggering away, struggling to regain her balance. The man looked at the wound on his arm, more annoyed than debilitated. Blood trickled between his fingers, but he seemed almost indifferent to the pain. "You have the same fight as your mother," he commented, advancing again. "She didn't make things easy either." The mention of Diana provoked something deep in Aurora, a primitive, visceral rage that awakened a strength she didn't know she possessed. When the man attacked again, she was ready. The fight that followed was brutal, desperate. It wasn't a disorganized street brawl, but a confrontation between a professional killer and a survivor determined not to be a victim again. The man was stronger, more trained. But Aurora was fighting for her life, for answers, for justice. Each blow she received, each impact against her body, only fueled her fierce determination. Then a sound of screeching tires, headlights illuminating the alley. Michael's black car skidded into the alley entrance, blocking the passage. The driver quickly got out, a gun in his hand. The assassin hesitated, assessing the new threat. It was enough for Aurora, bleeding from a cut on her eyebrow, to push him away and run towards the car. "Get in!" Michael shouted, keeping the gun, pointed at the man who was now retreating into the shadows. Aurora didn't need a second warning. She threw herself into the back seat as Michael quickly got in, stepping on the accelerator before even fully closing the door. The car sped off violently, leaving tire marks on the damp asphalt. Through the rear window, Aurora saw the man emerge from the shadows, watching their escape with those cold, empty eyes. He didn't seem frustrated or angry. He seemed patient, as if he knew there would be another opportunity. "You're hurt," Michael commented, looking at her in the rearview mirror as they maneuvered through London's night traffic. Aurora touched her face, feeling the warm, sticky blood. "I'm fine, nothing serious." Her voice sounded hoarse due to the pressure on her throat, which was beginning to show purple finger marks. "How did you find me in the alley?" "I saw the man following you. I tried to get to the back door in time, but you had already left. I followed the sounds of the struggle." Michael made a sharp turn, constantly checking if they were being followed. "Do you know him?" "No," Aurora replied, still trying to calm her breathing. "But he knew me. He called me Sybil Noguera." Michael nodded grimly. "So it's true. You are Diana's daughter." Aurora stared at the man with renewed suspicion. "How do you know about Diana?" "I worked for the Salvatore family for a long time. I was there when it all happened." He made another turn, entering smaller, less obvious streets. "Dante told me you had reappeared. He asked me to protect you with my life." "Why? What am I to him?" Michael looked at her in the rearview mirror again, his eyes meeting hers for a significant moment. A chance for redemption, perhaps, or something more. "It's not my place to say." They traveled in silence for the rest of the way, Aurora processing everything that had happened. The man in the alley was clearly not a common mugger or a random stalker. He was a professional assassin, possibly the same one who had tried to kill Salvatore that morning. Someone sent to permanently silence the last people who could expose secrets buried 15 years ago. When they arrived at the Cassian Tower, they did not use the main entrance or the service entrance. Michael led her to a discreet entrance at the back, used mainly for larger deliveries. He used a magnetic card to open the door and guided her through service corridors that Aurora, even knowing the building well, had never noticed. "Dante is waiting in apartment 22-4, Michael informed her as they ascended in a rarely used freight elevator, the same one as before. "Take him there, then I must go. I have to make sure no one followed you." "Here." Aurora nodded, grateful for the man's help and professionalism. When the elevator doors opened on the 22nd floor, Michael checked the corridor before allowing her to exit. "Aurora," he called as she was already walking away, "be careful, not just with the enemies outside, but also with what you are about to discover. Some truths are more dangerous than lies." With those enigmatic words, the elevator doors closed, leaving Aurora alone in the silent corridor. She walked quickly to apartment 2204 and knocked softly on the door. Salvatore opened it almost immediately, as if he had been waiting near the entrance. His expression of relief at seeing her quickly turned to concern as he noticed the blood on her face and the marks on her neck. "What happened?" he asked, gently pulling her inside and locking the door with several bolts. "Someone was waiting for me," Aurora replied as Salvatore guided her to the sofa. "Her man, professional. He tried to kill me." "The same one who came after me, probably." Salvatore briefly disappeared into the bathroom, returning with a first aid kit. "Let me see those injuries." Aurora instinctively recoiled when he approached with a compress. The movement was automatic, visceral. Years of self-imposed training to avoid touches, to maintain physical distance from everyone. Salvatore stopped immediately, respecting her reaction. "You can do it yourself," he said, offering her the compress, "or I can guide you if you prefer." The consideration for her personal space, for her need for control over her own body, touched Aurora in a way she didn't expect. She hesitated, then reached out to take the compress. Her fingers brushed his in the process, a minimal touch, almost insignificant for most people, but a significant act of trust for her. She cleaned the cut on her eyebrow, grateful to realize it was superficial, though it bled quite a lot, as head wounds often do. Salvatore kept his distance, but his eyes never left her face, studying her every move with an intensity that Aurora was beginning to recognize as characteristic of him. "He called me Sybil," she said as she pressed the compress against the cut. "Said he should have finished the job 15 years ago." Salvatore became visibly tense. "So it's as I suspected. He was sent to eliminate the last pieces of the puzzle. You and me. Who would send him? Your father is dead." "My father never acted alone," Salvatore replied, walking to the window to check the street below. He had partners, accomplices, people who would be equally implicated if the truth about Diana came out. "What truth?" Aurora pressed, tired of half-revelations. "What really happened in that apartment? What did my mother discover that was so dangerous?" Salvatore turned to face her, his dark eyes now revealing a complex mixture of emotions: guilt, anger, determination. "That's what we're going to find out tomorrow. In apartment 13. That night Aurora couldn't sleep. Apartment 2204 had 2 bedrooms, and Salvatore had insisted she take the main one while he used the guest room. The room was spacious, decorated with the same elegant minimalism that characterized the penthouse apartment, but without the covered artworks. In fact, there were no artworks at all, just white walls, essential furniture, and a huge window overlooking the city. Lying on the king-size bed that seemed absurdly large for her body, accustomed to small, cramped spaces, Aurora watched the city lights twinkling in the darkness. Each one represented lives, stories, tragedies, and joys that continued independently of her own search for truth. It was both comforting and disturbing to know that the world kept spinning despite the dark secrets buried in its foundations. Giving up on trying to sleep, she got up and went to the kitchen for water. She was surprised to find Salvatore sitting at the dining room table, surrounded by papers, photographs, and an open laptop. He hadn't slept either. He looked up when he heard her approach. "Insomniac too?" he asked with a faint, tired smile. Aurora nodded, moving closer to see what he was studying so intensely. They were blueprints of the Cassian Tower, detailed, technical, showing not only the visible structure but also ducts, conduits, maintenance accesses. And there were photos, old ones from 15 years ago. She recognized Diana in some of them, always elegant, always with those intense green eyes that had been passed down to her. "What is all this?" she asked, sitting in the chair opposite him. "Preparation," Salvatore replied, pushing some of the blueprints towards her. "We need to know exactly how to reach apartment 13 without being detected, and we need to know what to look for when we get there." Aurora examined the blueprints, noticing how Salvatore had marked a specific path, from the basement to the ventilation duct that passed through the 13th floor. "Do you really think we'll find anything after all these years?" "I have to believe," he replied, determination evident in his voice. Diana was intelligent, meticulous. If she hid something there, she hid it well. Something that not even my father, with all his resources, managed to find. "The key mentioned in the letter," Aurora murmured. "Exactly." Salvatore pushed another sheet of paper towards her, an enlarged and detailed analysis of the letter fragment Aurora had carried for so many years. "You studied this?" Aurora asked, surprised by the level of detail. "Every word, every mark. And I found something." Salvatore pointed to the bottom corner of the paper, where the ink seemed slightly darker in a specific pattern. "A watermark. It's not visible to the naked eye, but when subjected to ultraviolet light..." He picked up a small flashlight from the table and turned off the room lights. When he shone the flashlight on the paper, Aurora gasped. There was a clearly visible symbol now, a small drawing of an ancient key, and below it numbers, 13-1306. Apartment 13, Unit 1306, Salvatore translated the obvious. Diana left a literal clue about where to look. "But what exactly are we looking for?" Aurora asked, feeling the anticipation grow. "Documents, probably. Proof of what my father and his partners were doing." Salvatore turned off the flashlight and turned the normal lights back on. Money laundering was just the tip of the iceberg. There were rumors of influence peddling at governmental levels, funding of paramilitary groups abroad, unauthorized medical experiments. Medical experiments? Aurora frowned. Salvatore Pharmaceuticals didn't build its empire just on painkillers, Salvatore explained with bitterness. The Advanced Research Division worked on things that never came to public knowledge. Diana discovered some of them, apparently. Aurora felt a chill. "And you think that's why they killed her?" "Yes, I'm almost certain. She threatened to expose everything, to use the evidence she had gathered. My father couldn't allow that." A heavy silence fell between them. Aurora tried to process the magnitude of what they were about to unearth, not just the mystery of her own past, but possibly corporate and governmental scandals that had been carefully covered up for years. "Why are you doing this?" she asked abruptly. "Why risk your life, your position, everything you've built?" Salvatore looked at her for a long time before answering. "Because I've lived in the shadow of my father's crimes for too long. Because I built my own fortune, my own power, precisely for this moment, when I would finally have the resources to expose the truth without being immediately silenced." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "And because I promised a scared little girl 15 years ago that one day everything would be all right. A promise I couldn't keep. Till now." Aurora felt something break inside her, a wall, a barrier she had kept up for so many years. The memory suddenly surfaced, crystal clear, hidden in a dark closet, trembling with fear, watching through the cracks as a man, Charles Salvatore, dragged her mother's inert, bloodied body out of the room. And then the closet door slowly opening, and a young face terrified but determined. Dante, 17 years old, extending his hand to her, whispering, "It's going to be all right. I promise." "I remember," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "I remember you finding me, getting me out of there." Salvatore's eyes widened slightly. "You remember?" Aurora nodded, feeling tears she rarely allowed welling in the corners of her eyes. "Not everything, just fragments, but I remember your promise." Without realizing what she was doing, she reached out across the table, bringing her hand closer to Salvatore's. She didn't quite touch him, but the gesture itself, the voluntary reduction of the distance she always maintained, was profoundly significant. Salvatore looked at her hand, then at her eyes, understanding what that represented. Slowly he took the last step, covering the small distance that separated their hands. The touch was light, almost imperceptible, but Aurora did not pull back. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time since she was a child, she allowed someone to touch her without feeling panic or aversion. The moment passed, delicate as the flutter of a butterfly's wings. Both drew back, aware of the fragility of what had just happened, of what was beginning to grow between them. "We should try to get some sleep," Salvatore finally said, his voice softer than usual. "Tomorrow will be a decisive day." Aurora silently agreed and returned to the bedroom. This time, when she lay down, sleep came almost immediately. Not the restless, vigilant sleep she was accustomed to, but something deeper, more restorative. As if, for the first time in 15 years, a small part of her felt safe. The next morning they prepared meticulously. Salvatore had provided everything they would need: powerful flashlights, specialized tools for forcing locks, ropes and climbing equipment for the vertical shaft, even respirators in case the sealed apartment contained stagnant or moldy air. They spent the day reviewing plans, studying escape routes, practicing the movements they would need to make in the confined space of the ducts. Aurora was surprised by the ease with which her body, strengthened by years of intense physical labor, adapted to the requirements. Salvatore was also surprisingly agile and strong for a man many considered just a businessman. "Military training," he explained when he noticed her curious gaze. "I spent 2 years in special forces after leaving the clinic in Switzerland. I wanted to be prepared, in case I ever had to confront my father or his associates." Aurora nodded, admiring his long-term dedication, his strategic patience. "You planned this for a very long time." 15 years, he confirmed. "Every step, every move, every acquisition and investment, all leading to this moment, to justice for Diana and for you." As the day progressed, Aurora felt a strange calm settle in, not the emotional numbness she was accustomed to, but a focused clarity, a serene determination. She was about to confront the epicenter of everything that had defined her life, all the losses and traumas she had endured. And, surprisingly, she felt no fear, only a firm resolve. When night finally arrived, they were ready. Dressed in practical black clothes, carrying only essentials in light backpacks, they made their way through the secondary corridors of the Cassian Tower, avoiding cameras, using the blind spots that Salvatore had meticulously mapped over the years. The duct access was exactly where the blueprints indicated, behind a ventilation grate in the ceiling of a rarely used storage room in the basement. Salvatore climbed first, silently removing the grate and hoisting himself into the cramped space. He extended a hand to help Aurora, who accepted the support without hesitation. The duct was wide enough for them to crawl through, though not comfortably. The accumulated dust of years entered their lungs, making them grateful for the masks they had brought. They moved in silence, communicating only when necessary through hand signals they had agreed upon earlier. The vertical climb was the most challenging part. The central duct, which served all floors, was narrow and slippery. They used urban climbing techniques, pressing themselves against opposite walls, advancing slowly, one movement at a time. The physical effort was intense, but Aurora found that her body responded with a strength she didn't know she possessed. When they finally reached the height of the 13th floor, Salvatore signaled them to stop. With precise movements, he detached a specific section of the duct wall, revealing another horizontal corridor, a maintenance access that was not on the official blueprints, but which he had discovered in his years of methodical exploration of the building. They crawled for a few more meters until they reached a grate. Through it, They could see what no one had seen for 15 years, the corridor of the 13th floor. It was dark, dusty, with an air of abandonment that sent shivers down their spines. Salvatore worked on the grate with silent tools, carefully removing it to avoid making noise. When they finally emerged into the corridor, the feeling was almost surreal. They were on a ghost floor, a place that officially no longer existed. The emergency light still worked, emitting a faint greenish glow that gave the environment a dreamlike, almost underwater quality. The corridor was identical to the other residential floors of the building, numbered doors in sequence, carpet on the floor, now covered by a thin layer of dust. Fire extinguishers on the walls. 306, Salvatore whispered, pointing to a door at the end of the corridor. Diana's apartment. They approached cautiously, alert for any security system that might have been left active. The door looked normal, with no obvious signs of tampering or forced entry. The lock was sophisticated by 15-year-old standards, but nothing Salvatore's specialized tools couldn't overcome. As he worked on the lock, Aurora felt something strange, a familiar smell that provoked a visceral reaction in her body. It wasn't just the smell of mold or stagnant air expected in a place sealed for so many years. It was something more, something that activated deeply buried memories. Turpentine, she murmured, finally recognizing it, and oil paint. Salvatore looked at her with surprise. You remember? Diana painted, Aurora replied, the memory emerging like bubbles from the bottom of a lake. Not just as a profession, it was her passion. There was always the smell of paint and turpentine at home. A soft click indicated that Salvatore had managed to open the lock. They exchanged a significant look. They were about to enter the epicenter of everything. The place where Diana Nogueira had disappeared, where Aurora's blood had been cleaned, where secrets had been buried for 15 long years. Ready? Salvatore asked softly. Aurora nodded. Ready? He pushed the door slowly and they entered. The apartment was exactly as it had been left 15 years ago, frozen in time, preserved like a macabre capsule. The living room was spacious, decorated with elegant furniture now covered by sheets that had yellowed over the years. The windows were sealed with metal plates from the inside, blocking any natural light that might have entered. But what was most striking were the walls. Every inch was covered with paintings, not conventional artworks but disturbing, frenetic images. Distorted faces, scenes of violence, esoteric symbols, chemical formulas, numerical codes. It was as if Diana had transformed the apartment into a visual diary of her investigation, recording everything she had discovered about the Salvatores and their dark dealings on the walls themselves. My God, Salvatore murmured, illuminating the images with his flashlight. She documented everything. Aurora felt strangely calm as she moved through the apartment, observing the paintings, recognizing her mother's unique style, even in the most disturbing representations. In some she identified faces, Charles Salvatore obviously, but also other men in suits, some with presidential sashes, others clearly high-ranking military. There were maps of Latin American countries with specific markings, dates, monetary values noted in the margins. She didn't just discover, Aurora said, comprehending the magnitude. She mapped the entire network of corruption. Funding of coups, experiments on vulnerable populations, international money laundering. Salvatore nodded grimly. This would have destroyed not only my father, but half the government at the time. Figures who are still in power today. They continued exploring the apartment, passing through the untouched kitchen, through the bathroom where rust stained the porcelain of the sinks, until they reached the master bedroom. The door was closed. Aurora hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. This was the place she knew instinctively, the place where Diana had died, the place where she, little Sybil, had hidden in the closet and witnessed the horror that her child's mind would later completely block. Salvatore gently placed his hand on her shoulder, the second voluntary touch between them, as significant as the first. We can do this together, he said softly. Or I can go first, if you prefer. Together, Aurora replied, finding renewed strength in his presence. They opened the door simultaneously, their flashlights illuminating the dark room. The bedroom was spacious, with a king-size bed still made, organized nightstands, a dressing table with perfume bottles and makeup arranged symmetrically. But what immediately caught the eye was the large, darkened stain on the carpet next to the bed, blood, that had penetrated so deeply that not even professional cleaning had managed to remove it completely. Aurora felt her legs weaken. Salvatore steadied her, his arm firm around her waist. She did not recoil from the contact. On the contrary, she leaned on him, allowing his strength to support her as she faced the spot where her mother had died. "There," she said suddenly, pointing to the large built-in closet in the corner of the room. "That's where I hid." "Where you found me." They approached the closet. Aurora opened the doors, revealing elegant women's clothes still hanging on hangers, shoes organized on shelves, boxes of accessories stacked methodically. She crouched, examining the bottom of the closet, where a small child could easily hide. It was then that she noticed a specific spot on the wooden floor of the closet that looked slightly different from the rest. She pressed it, and the small piece of wood sank, revealing a hidden cavity. "I found something," she said, her heart racing. Cautiously, she inserted her fingers into the small space, feeling a metallic object. When she pulled it out, she saw that it was exactly what they were looking for, an old ornate key, with the number 13 engraved on the metal. "The key from the letter," Salvatore murmured, admiring the object. "But a key to what?" Aurora stood up, the key firmly held in her hand. Something called to her, an instinct she couldn't explain. She walked to the dressing table, examining her mother's personal items, hairbrushes, makeup, perfume bottles. Among them there was a small jewelry box, seemingly ordinary, made of dark wood with simple carvings. "This one," she said with certainty, though she didn't know how she knew. She inserted the key into the small golden lock, and the box opened with a soft click. Inside there were no jewels but a device, an external drive, small and discreet, the kind used to store large amounts of data, and with it, a sealed envelope with the name Sybil written in the same elegant handwriting as the torn letter. With trembling fingers, Aurora picked up the envelope. Inside there was a letter, whole this time, not just a fragment. "My dearest Sybil," she read aloud, her voice choked with emotion. "If you are reading this, it means something has happened to me. It also means that somehow you have found your way back to this place, even against all odds. I always knew you were special, not just my daughter, but a wise soul, a born observer, like the ancient Sibyls who saw beyond the veil." Aurora paused, gathering strength to continue. "The drive contains all the evidence I gathered about the illegal activities of Salvatore Pharmaceuticals and its allies in the government. Unauthorized medical experiments, funding of authoritarian regimes, manipulation of global markets, everything is documented, with dates, names, values. It is dangerous, more dangerous than you can imagine. When you grow up, you will understand why we had to keep it a secret. Your future depends on this silence until the right moment. Never forget who you truly are. Not just my daughter, but a person of integrity, of strength, of truth. The key is where no one would think to look. Because sometimes the best way to hide something is to leave it in plain sight. If I am absent when you find this, look for Dante. Despite the father he has, he possesses a good heart, an honest soul. Trust him if you can find him. And always remember that I loved you more than anything in this world. That every choice I made was to protect you, even knowing the risks. When the time comes, you will know what to do with this information. Use it wisely, use it for justice, not for revenge, and live the full life I always wished for you. With all my love, your mother, Diana." The silence that followed was almost palpable. Aurora held the letter against her chest, tears streaming freely down her face. They were not just tears of pain, but of recognition, of connection finally re-established with the woman who had brought her into the world, who had loved her so deeply that she risked everything to expose the truth. Salvatore remained quiet, giving her space to process, to feel, to cry. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse with emotion. "She knew I would help you. Even then, even with everything my family represented, she believed in me." Aurora looked at him, seeing now not only the powerful and determined man, but also the scared teenager, who had risked everything to save an unknown child, who had spent years meticulously preparing for this moment of truth and justice. "She was right," Aurora said simply. They carefully put the letter and the drive in Salvatore's backpack. They were about to leave when they heard a metallic sound in the corridor, like a door opening. They were no longer alone on the ghost floor. Salvatore immediately turned off his flashlight, signaling Aurora to do the same. In the sudden darkness, They moved silently to the farthest corner of the room away from the door. "Is there another exit?" Aurora whispered, so low that only someone very close could hear. "Bathroom window," Salvatore replied at the same volume. "Leads to the side ventilation duct." Moving in absolute silence, guided only by the faint glow of the emergency lights filtering through the cracks in the door, they headed to the ensuite bathroom. Salvatore worked quickly on the sealed window, using specialized tools to open a passage to the adjacent duct. Footsteps in the corridor now. More than one person. Muffled voices. Aurora froze when she recognized one of them. "Matthew," she whispered, incredulous. "It's Matthew Noguera." Salvatore looked at her with alarm, then continued working on the window with renewed urgency. Finally, he managed to release the panel, revealing the opening to the duct. "You first," he instructed. Aurora was already preparing to enter when the apartment door opened. Pressed against the bathroom wall in the darkness, they could hear the voices more clearly now. "Are you sure they're here?" It was definitely Matthew, but his voice had a tone Aurora had never heard before. Cold, calculating. "The system detected movement on this floor," replied another, unknown voice. It must be Salvatore. He always suspected the apartment still existed. And the girl. Probably with him. Two birds with one stone. Aurora felt her blood run cold. Matthew was not the loving, dedicated father he had pretended to be. He was part of this. Part of the conspiracy that had killed Diana, that had tried to kill her. Salvatore urgently gestured towards the duct. Aurora hesitated, then pointed to the bathroom door. They communicated silently with gestures and glances, reaching a tacit agreement. They would not flee. They would face this, together. They retreated to the bedroom, positioning themselves strategically. Aurora behind the door, Salvatore next to the bed. The invaders' flashlights illuminated the apartment, creating elongated shadows, gradually revealing their presence. "Search everywhere," the unknown voice ordered. Especially the bedroom. The bedroom door opened slowly. A beam of light swept the room, passing close to where Salvatore was hiding. Aurora held her breath, watching the man enter. It wasn't Matthew, but another, burly with the movements of a military man or trained security. When he passed her, Aurora acted. With the technique learned on the streets and perfected in the recent confrontation, she attacked vital points, quick, silent, efficient. The man had no chance to scream before falling. Unconscious. Salvatore moved simultaneously, emerging from the shadows to confront the second person entering, Matthew Noguera. "You," Matthew hissed, recognizing him immediately. "I should have known." "It's over, Matthew," Salvatore replied, his posture indicating years of military training. "We have the evidence." "All of it." Matthew laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Evidence? After 15 years? No one will believe it. No one will care." "I care," Aurora's voice rang clear in the dim light. She advanced, stepping out of the shadows to face the man who had claimed to be her father. Matthew visibly hesitated upon seeing her. "Sybil, or Aurora, as you prefer to be called now. You don't understand what you're getting into, child." "I'm not a child anymore," Aurora replied, her voice firm despite the whirlwind of emotions. "And I understand perfectly. You betrayed Diana. You handed her over to Charles Salvatore." "It was necessary," Matthew replied, not denying the accusation. Diana didn't understand the bigger picture. She was obsessed with justice, with truth. She didn't realize that some truths are too dangerous to be revealed. "So you sold her out," Salvatore concluded, contempt evident in his voice. "Why? Money? Power? Survival?" Matthew retorted. "Your father gave me a choice, Diana or all of us, including Sybil. I did what I had to do to protect my family." "You protected no one but yourself," Aurora said, her anger growing. "You let her die. You let me be taken away. You let me forget who I was." "It was better that way," Matthew insisted. "You didn't need to carry the weight of those memories, of that truth. It wasn't your choice to make." Aurora advanced, fury overflowing. "You had no right to decide what I could endure, what I could know about my own mother." Matthew took a step back, surprised by her intensity. "You are exactly like her," he murmured. "The same fire, the same stubbornness. That's why I had to intervene now, when I knew you were getting close to the truth." "You tried to kill me," Aurora understood. "You sent that man to my apartment." Not to kill, Matthew corrected. To take you away. To protect you from all this. But he exceeded his instructions. Lie, Salvatore interjected. He tried to kill me too. This isn't protection, Matthew. It's cleanup. Elimination of witnesses. Matthew's gaze hardened. His hand moved slowly towards his coat. You won't leave here with that evidence. Not after all this time, all the sacrifices. Aurora noticed the movement. He's armed! Everything happened in seconds. Matthew pulled out a small pistol, pointing it towards Salvatore. Aurora reacted instinctively, throwing herself against the man she had once believed to be her father. The gun fired, the sound deafening in the confined space. Salvatore advanced simultaneously, disarming Matthew with a precise combat technique. The two men were fighting now, moving through the darkness of the room in a violent dance of calculated punches and blows. Aurora regained her balance, ready to help when she felt a sharp, hot pain spreading through her abdomen. She looked down and saw the dark stain growing on her shirt. The shot had hit her. "Dante," she called, her voice weaker than she expected. Salvatore turned at the sound of her name, his first name, not his surname, coming from her lips for the first time. The moment of distraction was enough for Matthew to land a strong blow, making him stumble. But Aurora would not fall easily. Even wounded, even feeling the warm blood trickling down her skin, she advanced again. Years of survival on the streets, years of intense physical labor, years of accumulated strength she had never had a chance to use, all converging on this moment. The confrontation that followed was brief, brutal. Matthew was stronger, perhaps more trained, but Aurora fought with the fury of 15 years of loss, of pain, of stolen identity. And she was not alone. Salvatore recovered quickly, joining the fight with the cold precision of someone trained for combat. When they finally finished, Matthew was immobilized on the floor, Salvatore holding him firmly as Aurora, gasping, pressed her hand against the wound in her abdomen. "Aurora!" Salvatore exclaimed upon noticing the blood. "You've been hit." "It's not serious," she replied, though the pain was increasing. "It grazed me." Salvatore quickly tied Matthew using ropes from his climbing equipment, ensuring he wouldn't escape, then turned his attention to Aurora, examining the wound carefully. "We need to get out of here," he said, concern evident in his voice. "Can you walk?" Aurora nodded, refusing to be the fragile victim. "I can." Salvatore improvised a dressing with first aid material from his backpack, then helped her up. The drive and the letter were safe, the evidence intact. And Matthew, the traitor, the man who had allowed Diana to die, who had tried to erase the truth, was contained, finally unable to cause further harm. "What about him?" Aurora asked, looking at Matthew, who watched them with a mixture of hatred and resignation. "The police will find him," Salvatore replied, "along with all the evidence they need. This time there will be no interference, no cover-ups. I know people I can trust now, journalists, independent prosecutors." Aurora looked one last time at the apartment where her mother had died, where her fate had been sealed 15 years ago. She didn't feel the closure she had hoped for, the complete resolution, but she felt something different, something equally powerful, a beginning, the chance to finally live without the weight of an unknown past, without the ghosts of fragmented memories. Leaning on each other, Aurora and Salvatore left apartment 1306, carrying with them the truths that Diana Nogueira had died to protect, and which now, finally would see the light of day. 3 months later, Aurora watched the sunrise from the balcony of a beachfront house on the English north coast. The ocean stretched before her, vast and serene, so different from the urban chaos she had been accustomed to all her life. The salty air had a healing effect, as if each breath washed away a little more of the invisible scars she carried. The visible scar on her abdomen was still pink, sensitive, but doctors assured her that in time it would barely be noticeable. The other scars, the emotional, the psychological, those would take longer to heal. But for the first time, Aurora truly believed that healing was possible. The revelations of recent months had shaken the country. The documents left by Diana, combined with subsequent investigations, exposed a network of corruption, crime, and abuse that spanned decades. Powerful figures fell daily, corporate empires crumbled, the truth finally emerging from the shadows where it had been buried for so long. Matthew Nogueira now faced multiple charges: complicity in murder, obstruction of justice, attempted murder. His cooperation with authorities, in the hope of reducing his sentence, revealed even more layers of the conspiracy that had killed Diana and tried to silence Aurora. Coffee? The soft voice behind her belonged to Dante Salvatore, no longer the powerful and distant penthouse owner, but simply Dante, the man who had risked everything for justice, who had faced the demons of his own surname, who had been by her side through every step of recovery. Aurora turned, accepting the cup he offered. Their fingers brushed in the process, a touch that now came naturally, without the panic or aversion of before. "Thank you," she said. Referring not only to the coffee, Dante smiled, that rare smile that completely transformed his face, softening the lines of worry, illuminating the dark eyes that had seen too much. "How are you feeling today?" "Better," Aurora replied honestly. "The nightmares are less frequent." Since fully recovering her memories, the trauma witnessed at 6 years old, the 3 years in captivity before being abandoned near the orphanage that would later burn down, Aurora had battled vivid nightmares, terrifying flashbacks. Therapy helped, as did Dante's constant patient and respectful presence. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the ocean, each lost in their own thoughts. The relationship between them had evolved slowly, naturally, without pressure or expectations. Mutual respect had transformed into trust, trust into affection, affection into something deeper that both were still learning to name. "I heard from the lawyer," Dante finally said. "The name change has been approved. Officially, you can be Sybil again, if you wish." Aurora, or Sybil, considered the information. For months she had grappled with the question of identity, of who she truly was. Aurora was the name given by the social worker, an identity built on forgetting. Sybil was the name chosen by Diana, laden with history, with expectations. "I think I'll be both," she finally decided. "Aurora Sybil Nogueira, a name for each part of me. For who I was, who I am, who I can become." Dante nodded, perfectly understanding the duality with which she struggled, the same duality he had faced in carrying the Salvatore surname, while working tirelessly to dismantle the dark legacy his father had built. "It suits you," he commented. "Both names together." Aurora smiled, a smile that became more frequent each day. "And what comes next for us?" It was the first time either of them had explicitly mentioned a shared future, though the idea had been hovering between them for weeks. Dante didn't answer immediately. Instead, he extended his hand, a silent invitation. "Aurora." Now Aurora Sybil accepted, intertwining her fingers with his. The touch, once so difficult, so laden with fear and painful memories, now brought comfort, security, possibilities. "Anything," Dante finally replied, looking at their joined hands. "Anything we want to build. Without ghosts, without secrets, without fears, just us." The simplicity of the answer touched Aurora deeply. After a lifetime defined by trauma and loss, by the absence of choices and control, the prospect of an open future, determined only by her own decisions, was simultaneously terrifying and liberating. "I like that," she said softly. "Us." The sun was now fully above the horizon, bathing them in golden light, creating a moment of perfect clarity. Aurora Sybil Nogueira, no longer the invisible cleaner of the Cassian Tower, no longer the girl without memory, no longer the solitary survivor, but a complete woman, whole mistress of her own story. And by her side, Dante Salvatore, no longer haunted by his father's crimes, no longer consumed by guilt and the obsessive search for redemption, but a man who had finally found peace by helping to reveal the truth, by protecting the daughter of the woman he had once tried to save. "Us," he repeated, slowly leaning towards her. When their lips met for the first time, after months of gradual, respectful approach, there were no fireworks or dramatic revelations. There was only warmth, connection, the silent recognition of two souls who had found in each other not just desire or passion, but understanding. The rare and precious feeling of finally being seen, completely by someone who had chosen to stay, despite knowing all the scars, all the breaks, all the difficult parts. When they pulled apart, Aurora saw in Dante's eyes the same thing she felt, not the end of a story of mystery and pain, but the beginning of something new. Something built not on secrets buried in ghost apartments, not on betrayals and conspiracies, but on truth, trust, and the deliberate, daily choice to remain. The ocean continued its eternal movement before them, waves breaking against the sand in a constant, relentless rhythm. Like the truth, Aurora thought. No matter how long it remained submerged, it eventually found its way to the surface, to the light. Diana finally had her justice. Aurora Sybil finally had her past, her identity, her truth. And together, she and Dante had the most valuable thing of all, a future that for the first time belonged entirely to them.